So I said it was going to come back. It's late. This is like my seventh video for the day. So I'm going to say blaze one if you got one, and let's watch some Bernie Sanders, because that's essentially the way those things coincide on a political channel. And so yeah, this is the end of the day. This is probably going to be my last video for the night. Viewers request Bernie Sanders and watching his response to Donald Trump's video. Now, Donald Trump gives an Oval Office address. He gives an Oval Office address in this kind of shameful position of a president of shutting down the government itself in order to get his particular policy pushed that the public doesn't necessarily want and that only a small faction of the country wants, and in no real way do we need. The Democratic Party, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, comes out and gives their response, but Bernie Sanders also gives his response. Now, Donald Trump's position is mainly it's the Democrats' fault, and there are rapists and drug dealers and terrorists that are coming across the border that is harming Americans, and in order to keep America safe, you must build a wall. And in this, there were all sorts of lies, conflations that he made in order to try to make this point, which was utter nonsense. What it boils down to is he made a campaign promise that he was going to build a wall and that Mexico was going to pay for it. From the standpoint of chess, Donald Trump has affixed himself to this position, meaning he's declared himself that he's going to build a wall. And in declaring that he was going to build a wall, he made immigration a touchstone of building that wall. And while saying he was going to build that wall and saying immigration was this major issue, he's essentially, there's no way for Mexico to pay for it, meaning he has to pay for it. Democrats have just taken the House of Representatives, meaning they're certain backed up with this idea that they were able to take the House of Representatives, meaning they have a backing. The public itself has seen Donald Trump running around the country screaming about building a wall. And because they've seen him running around the country screaming about building a wall, they associate wall with him from the standpoint of a political thing, not necessarily something that they absolutely need, but from a political standpoint. The Democratic Party looks at this and says, not only do they affix this to you, you can't back away from this policy because you've staked a certain degree of political capital on backing up this particular policy. And he has, which is why he continues to push when we're in, week 3, with federal government being shut down. Democratic Party, however, not going to budge. There's not one Democrat alive that will back up this idea of giving Donald Trump 1 red cent in order to fund that border wall. But between the two, he's in a worse position. Like, for the Democratic Party can pile on in regards to the pen on this. He's affixed to the position. Any deviation from the position itself is going to be regarded as a loss. He's affixed his ego, in addition to the politics of it, into all of this. If he backs away from it, if he's beaten on this, meaning if Congress gets to the point where the number of Republicans start to peel away support, and you get enough where you can have a veto of the president itself in order to fund the government minus the border wall, that's a loss. And that is possible of losing. Possible of taking place. And I would even say it's more possible than members of the Democratic Party peeling off in order to give him money for that wall. I strongly suspect what is going to take place is there's going to be a concerted effort against Republicans. The wild card on this are the workers themselves. If those workers themselves stop working, if they realize and get it in their heads that there's a certain amount of power that takes place and that they shouldn't suffer in silence, that pain should be visited upon the entirety of the nation, if you get 1% of the population that's in the military, that 1% of the population goes off and essentially fights these wars and everything else, and they're utterly detached from the rest of the nation. Part of the reason why the presidents can have these foreign engagement in wars and everything else is because they're not large-scale wars, and you can keep a small percentage of the population almost separated, engaging in the conflict. It's not visited upon the whole. I'm saying if it's visited upon the whole, you have the whole start taking notice of stuff that's taking place. If this guy can't get on his flight, if this person takes 4 hours to get through the airport, if the pace of civilization starts to slow and sputter, it will start putting more pressure on the representatives to do their goddamn jobs. That's my point. I gave a synopsis of Trump. I'll show a part of Pelosi and Schumer, and then we'll go to Sanders. Let's see. This is a Sanders thing, so let's put Bernie Sanders here. Let's get rid of this. Yeah. Come on. Alright, I'll leave it. Alright, so let's take a look at Pelosi. Oh, right, I forgot I did that. Pelosi and Schumer responding to Trump. This is only a 38-second soundbite, but it give you this kind of spirit in which they were responding. Ultimately, it's the president know it's his fault, and we tried to fund the bill, fund the government, which they did. They actually did pass a funding bill. That's another thing. Rationality. Pulling away and saying, look, we tried to fund the government with the exception of the border wall, and that we need to separate the border wall as a separate issue for discussion and not have that linked to the debt. Now, from the standpoint of somebody who is outside of politics, that makes all the sense in the world. To the standpoint of somebody who's in politics, they know that keeping the government held hostage is the thing that allows that motif to work. Meaning, if Donald Trump separates the border wall from the funding of the government, his border wall will never get built because nobody would ever give him money for it because they would have no reason to give him money for it. The impetus is the threat that's on the government itself, meaning he's holding the government hostage. Let's take a little soundbite of Pelosi and Schumer.
Sadly, much of what we heard from President Trump throughout this senseless shutdown has been full of misinformation and even malice. The president has chosen fear. We want to start with the facts. The fact is, on the very first day of this Congress, House Democrats passed Senate Republican legislation to reopen government and fund smart, effective border security solutions. But the president is rejecting these bipartisan bills which would reopen government over his obsession with forcing American taxpayers to waste billions of dollars on an expensive and ineffective wall.
Pelosi is not wrong on that, by the way. There we are. Yeah, Pelosi is not wrong on that, by the way. This is one of those things where just being on the right side of the politics, you endear a certain amount of support. So, two things that I want to point out that was said during the conversation. During the speech. President Trump claimed the federal government remains shut down for one reason and one reason only, because Democrats will not fund border security. It is not true that Democrats oppose funding for border security. They just aren't willing to meet Trump's demands for more than $5 billion for border funding. Congressional Democratic leaders have offered funding of roughly $1.3 billion for border security in the current showdown fight. I just wanted to make that clear. Democrats have offered money for border security, just not that wall. The wall is a political touchstone. Allowing him the wall allows him a political victory. Denying him that wall does the same, denies him a political victory, particularly since he staked so much political capital on getting that wall built. This is a public showdown where the government itself is being shut down over what amounts to a political fight. Trump is going to lose this, though. He's hurting people in a straightforward way, people who even supported him. And like I said, if those people start visiting that pain among the rest of the nation, this is not going to go well for him. Let's see. Democrats say he's choosing fear over facts. He's choosing fear over facts from the context of motivating a base that believes immigration is a big deal, even though immigration has gone down year after year after year after year after year. So in essence, yes. Let's get to Sanders. And let's hear Sanders' response.
Thank you very much for joining me.
By the way, for the people who say Sanders is not running for president, why do these? Like, he's putting himself in a posture where he looks as if he could be the president. If you notice, Obama used to just do that when he was running. candidates do that when they try to make people get into their heads that they can see them in that particular position. It's a politics thing also. If you look at that person and you get familiar with that person in that particular position, when that person is up for election, that person may seem more presidential as opposed to maybe the other. Many of the candidates started to do that. I guess I'm making a point of why do this if he's not, at the very least, thinking severely about running.
Me this evening. President Trump has stated tonight and over again in recent weeks that this country faces a national emergency. Well, he's right. But it is an emergency and a crisis that he himself has created. As we speak, some 800,000 federal employees, people who are our neighbors, friends, and family members, are going without pay. As working people, many of them are wondering how they will pay their mortgages, how they will feed their kids, and how they'll be able to go to the doctor. These are the people in the FBI, in the TSA, in the State Department, in the Treasury Department, and other agencies who have, in some cases, worked for the federal government for decades. Let me just quote what one federal employee has said, just one. Quote, "I am a single mom and a federal employee. I have $100 to last me, and my vehicle payments will not be made this month. I live paycheck to paycheck, and I can't get a side job because I still have to go to my unpaid federal job." End of quote. And she speaks for thousands of federal employees. Our federal employees deserve to be treated with respect, not held hostage as political pawns. Further, if this government shutdown continues, and Trump has indicated that he is prepared to shut it down for months, if not years, millions of Americans, including the disabled, the children, and the elderly, may not be able to get the food stamps they need to eat. Pregnant mothers and their babies may go without the nutrition assistance they need to stay healthy, as the WIC program is on the verge of running out of money. Small businesses and farmers will not be able to receive the financial assistance they need, and some may go out of business. Security at our nation's airports could be threatened if TSA employees and air control traffic controllers are not getting paid. People who are buying or selling their homes may see significant delays because the Federal Housing Administration is unable to process and approve mortgage applications. Let me be as clear as I can be. This shutdown should never have happened. As many of you will recall, on December 19th, the U.S. Senate voted unanimously to keep the government open. Unanimously. No Democrat or Republican opposed the bill that passed the Senate. It was widely expected that the following morning, December 20th, the House would do the same and the government would remain open. Unfortunately, President Trump...
So, I like this. I mean, when I did my video on Sanders, I kind of pointed... He could have combed his hair so it would have been his final form. I kind of pointed to the cost of this. And I don't mean the cost of this from the standpoint of dollars. I mean the cost of this from the standpoint of lives. I mean, human beings, just like you and I, go about their day, and instead of knowing they're going to get a paycheck next week, when the majority of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, they are unclear whether they're going to get a paycheck. And not just unclear, they're unclear the next time they're going to get one. Because the President of the United States has decided he wants to build a wall, and he's decided he wants to do this for purely craven political reasons. These are, like, I couldn't imagine my mom not getting a paycheck. My mom worked for the city, so it's not the same as working for the state, but or the federal government. But I couldn't imagine that there is, let's say, some kind of funding crisis in the city, the mayor is getting into a pissing match with their opposition, and the city goes unfunded, and people like my mom, who just go to work every day, not getting paid a huge amount, but making ends meet, don't get paid that week. That is amazing. That should be red alarms from the standpoint of people who are dealing with this, especially in the mindset of somebody who's part of the 99% and who considers themselves vulnerable. I mean, any of us are vulnerable to that. And it's the reasoning of it and the cavalierness in which Trump is doing this, where he's like, I'll let it be shut down for a year if I need to be shut down. Like I said, I think he's going to lose this. Democrats aren't peeling off on this. They've passed the bill. They can always point to the things that, look, we funded the border security. We're just not funding that goddamn wall. And use that to some degree as a club to continuously hit him with. At some point, those Republicans are going to start peeling off. But again, this may be a workers thing where when those workers finally stop going into work and airports start being shut down and that type of stuff starts taking place, that's when you may start get more of a reaction from the standpoint of some of the members making a decision of whether they're not going to peel off. But while these people suffer in silence, it doesn't hit them as if it would hit somebody like you or I. Let's see. Let's go back to Sanders and let him finish up on this before he goes into his next point.
Who started receiving criticism from an assortment of right-wing ideologues, changed his mind about the agreement and said that he would not sign any bill unless it included $5.7 billion for a wall on the southern border. And by the way, the total cost of that wall could run as high as $70 billion. In terms of this shutdown, President Trump has made it very clear who is responsible. As you will all recall, in a very public meeting he held in the Oval Office, he said, and I quote, this is quoting Donald Trump, quote, "I am proud to shut down the government. I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you, Chuck Schumer, for it." End of quote. On January 3rd, 2019, on their first day in the majority, the Democrats in the House passed legislation to reopen the government. This was exactly the same bill unanimously passed by the Senate. Tonight, I urge Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to allow that bill to come to the floor for a vote. This is the same bill that Mr. McConnell supported when it was unanimously passed in the Senate. Senator McConnell, let's vote to end this shutdown now in a bipartisan way. President Trump tonight has told us why he believes we need the wall. It gives me no pleasure to tell you what most of you already know, and that is that President Trump lies all of the time. And in his remarks tonight and in recent weeks regarding immigration.
Oh, that's hilarious. I love that. I didn't realize that that's where he was going to go with that. He says, I hate to tell you something that I think you already know. And it's like, okay, where's Bernie Sanders going with this? The president lies a lot. And he's right. I've never seen anything like it from the standpoint of the way Trump lies. It's almost like it gets him from point A to point B, where it just kind of comes out. And he runs with it. And it's like, Jesus fucking Christ. My dad was a habitual liar, where he would tell you whatever he needed to tell you to get from point A to point B. It's not necessarily good quality in individuals and human beings when you're interacting with them. And it is even less of a good quality when the person is president of the United States and you're trying to get actual information out of something that the person is doing, especially when you have hundreds of thousands of people who are being adversely affected by it. The fact that Bernie Sanders calls a lie, I love it that much more. Let's keep this train rocking. It was something else. Let me see. Oh, trying to get Mitch McConnell to pass that bill. So that's somewhat of, I still think that's an effective attack. So keep in mind, the attack is not necessarily what's taking place in the subjective politics of it. Meaning the subjective politics of it is they want to peel away support from Donald Trump in order to get a veto over the president's veto. They want to get it over the bar, and they want to put more pressure on Donald Trump by getting Mitch McConnell to essentially pass that bill to say, look, the Republicans in the House and the Republicans in the Senate got together in bipartisan way to pass the legislation to open the government up. And the only person who's not doing it, the only person who's not at this party is Donald Trump. That's what he wants. It puts a certain degree of pressure of saying the exact same bill is the bill that we passed. He just needs to bring up the exact same bill. I love this line of attack because the line of attack is some degree effective. But it does depend on whether or not people are paying attention to what you're saying and understanding. It just looks bad from an outside perspective if you don't necessarily pay attention to politics. But it makes sense in a funny sort of way from the standpoint of Trump is supporting his base on this. The Republican Party has to make a choice on whether or not they're going to support Trump or not, and whether or not this adversely affects them when they're going into the political season. And Democrats, for the most part, don't have that choice. They don't need to make that choice. I mean, you could say that they're making it to some degree, but for the most part, they're safe for the time being in the context of their positioning. We've passed this bill. It is up to the president right now. The president is not going to sign it because of that border wall, but we've funded the border protection. The president just needs to sign it. If they can isolate Donald Trump on this, the attack becomes that much more severe. Trump pins himself to border thing. So now he's saying Trump lies. He's right. Trump does lie. Trump lies flagrantly and aggressively. Let's let Sanders continue.
Is the same bill that Mr. McConnell supported when it was unanimously passed in the Senate. Senator McConnell, let's vote to end the shutdown now in a bipartisan way. President Trump tonight has told us why he believes we need the wall. It gives me no pleasure to tell you what most of you already know, and that is that President Trump lies all of the time. And in his remarks tonight and in recent weeks regarding immigration and the wall, he continues to lie. Just a few examples. Trump has told the American people several hundred times, and he mentioned it tonight, that Mexico would pay for the wall. That's a lie. If this wall were to be built, Mexico would not pay for it. American taxpayers would. Trump said that thousands and thousands of terrorists are entering the United States from the southern border. That is also a lie. According to a State Department report released in September, quote, at year's end, there was no credible evidence indicating that international terrorist groups have sent operatives via Mexico into the United States, end of quote.
By the way, if Bernie Sanders was running against Donald Trump, I think this is the line or the way, this is how this campaign is going to go. This is what the president said. This is how the president has lied. And essentially attacks repeatedly on that same point, with an added advantage that Sanders is less of a hypocrite on issues of domestic policy and so forth. So you get this thing of this guy being an outsider. You also get this thing of the person having a certain degree of integrity. And you have them attacking somebody that doesn't have any. I love these attacks. It's just, the president said this was a lie. The president said this was a lie. And your speech is essentially, this is what I want to accomplish. And your president has been lying flagrantly to you. You know he's been lying to you. And let's go through the ways in which he's been lying to you. I like this. I like it.
Quote. That's not Bernie Sanders' opinion. That is a direct quote from Trump's own State Department. Trump recently said that some ex-presidents told him that they should have built a wall. That is a lie. All 4 living ex-presidents have stated clearly that they never talked to Trump about their desire to build a wall. Trump said that we need a wall to prevent heroin fentanyl, and other illegal drugs from coming into the country. Another lie. According to Donald Trump's own Drug Enforcement Administration, the most common method Mexican cartels use to transport illegal drugs over the southwest border is through legal ports of entry using passenger vehicles. And on it goes. In terms of immigration in this country, what we need to do is not to waste billions of dollars on a wall, but to finally address the need for comprehensive immigration reform, including improved border security. It is inhumane that tiny children at the border have been torn away from their parents. It is disgraceful that 1.8 million young people raised in the United States and who know no other country but the United States have lost their legal protection under the DACA program because of Trump's actions. It is heartbreaking that almost 11 million undocumented people living in this country, the overwhelming majority of whom are hardworking and law-abiding, worry every day about being deported and separated from their loved ones. Sadly, what President Trump is trying to do is to create fear and hatred in our country. Instead of trying to bring us together as a people, he is trying to divide us up. And in the process, divert our attention away from the real crises facing the working families of this nation. President Trump, you want to talk about crises? At a time of massive income and wealth inequality, tens of millions of our workers are earning starvation wages and are unable to adequately provide for their families. That's a crisis. You want to talk about a national emergency? 30 million Americans have no health insurance, and many more are underinsured. Thousands die each year because they don't go to a doctor when they should. And our life expectancy in this country is actually in decline.
God damn it, man. It makes you wistful. Like, I look at that, and my experiences of that's the argument that I want to be made in the political sphere. He's making the argument against Donald Trump right now, but I would prefer that's the argument that's made, that's being attacked, not the argument that's is being used to attack. What I mean by this, he's bringing up issues that matter and affect regular, everyday people. People aren't getting their wages. People aren't being access to health care. People having a difficult time providing for themselves and providing in their situation. And making the point that us, as a collective, working together, can come up with solutions in order for those to solve those particular issues, or at the very least to make life better in a real material way. Not necessarily a bullshit way, but a real material way where there's a significant gain and benefits to human beings. But he makes the argument so naturally, and it comes across in a way that's believable. I just wish that argument was being made as a defense, not necessarily as an attack. Because if it's made as a defense, it's made as a defense of somebody who's putting through policies that function in that way with those priorities. Those are the things that are on his mind. Those are the things that he wants to get accomplished. Those are the things that he has in his list to do. When he gets up in the morning, when he goes to bed at night, that list doesn't necessarily change. I love that. I love that. And I love the fact that I can trust that. Whereas that's not necessarily true with any other candidate. So I watch that, and it makes me, a bit wistful at what could have been. I'm going to get joked for saying that, but it's true. Let's keep going.
While the pharmaceutical industry makes tens of billions of dollars a year in profit, 1 in 5 Americans can't afford the medicine they need. Now that is a crisis we should be working on right now. And here's another crisis. Too many of our seniors are living in desperate poverty, and about half of older Americans have no retirement savings. Hundreds of thousands of young people cannot afford to go to college in this country, and over 40 million are trying to deal with the outrageous levels of student debt they are experiencing. What are we going to do about those crises?
Listen to this. Like, I've watched Sanders in one of his stump speeches go for like 45 minutes on this. Just an articulation of one problem after the next, after the next, after the next. And his solution for this is not a bullshit solution. The guy calls himself a socialist. And at the very least, somewhat of an FDR Democrat, if you want to call him anything. His solutions would be considered radical, at least for the time frame, but those solutions boil down to increasing the tax rate, and he has Stephanie Kelton on his team, so I'd imagine this idea of elements of MMT, or at the very least Keynesian economics. It's a different set of priorities. And by the way, whether Sanders can get everything that he wanted to accomplish or not is somewhat besides the point. It's the belief that the perspective is earnest and that the person will absolutely try to get something accomplished. Meaning, if I was in that position and I had all of the powers endowed in me to try to get XYZ accomplished, and I woke up in the morning, what would be the results of that? And can I trust him to do that? Let's let him finish. I like this. I get wistful when I hear him doing the stump speech. That's all. That's all. I'm man enough to say it.
Maybe here's the biggest crisis of all. The scientific community has made it very clear in telling us that climate change is real and is causing devastating harm to our country and the entire planet. And they have told us in no uncertain terms that if we do not transform our energy system away from fossil fuel, our nation and our planet, and the planet we will be leaving our kids and grandchildren, may well become unhealthy and even uninhabitable in the not-so-distant future. Mr. President, we don't need to create artificial crises. We have enough real crises. Let us end this shutdown and bring the American people together around an agenda that will improve life for all of our people.
Well, that was Bernie Sanders responding to Donald Trump's speech today on the border shutdown, or shutdown at the government shutdown. I'm doing two things at once. Jamal gets all googly eyed when he gets Sanders. No, it's not when I see him. It's when I hear him. Come on, tell me. There's something about hearing someone articulate what you want to see affected in the world that's compelling when you hear it, especially when you think the person is earnest. This is not, just a bullshit, I want to try to get X. This is how the world should look, and if I get the opportunity, I'm going to try to make it look that way. And I've been trying to do this for the past 40 years, and this is the closest that I've been to getting to the power structures, and I haven't changed my mantra. That's what that is. It's the belief that the person is earnest. Not to mention you're hearing stuff that you agree with, if that makes sense. Whisper of a dream. Yeah, whisper of a dream. Yeah. There's no in hell black voters would choose Bernie over Kamala, Corey, or Biden. He needs a better delivery, a better message, and he needs to call for a revolution. True Hunt. I don't know if that's true. Bernie Sanders had a large amount of support for African Americans, and especially among young African American voters. In the last presidential cycle, they didn't know who he was. In this cycle, they know exactly who he is, and many of us, agree with him. So we'll see. I think they will. There's an honest political discussion in the black community Harris voters hurt minorities and poor communities hardest. Well, Harris, you know, that criminal justice record is gross, man. They're putting people in prison in order to have them fight fires at 8 cents a day, or not letting them out of prison when they're supposed to be let out of prison. With the argument from the Justice Department or the area where she worked that we can't afford to let them out of prison because we need somebody to fight fires and do other duties around, and we can pay these guys like 8 cents an hour. Oh God, it was gross. It's completely gross. All right, it is late, so I am going to end this one. I don't think I have any more for tonight. I was trying to make up for not getting them in yesterday on Monday. My treatment schedule has changed, at the very least in the short term, since I've been back, trying to pull off an excess amount of fluid, which forces me to essentially go to all of them. I have one tomorrow, but I'm going to try to get some videos in the morning before I leave, and if I'm up for it when I get back. So this is probably going to be the last video for tonight. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. And you can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all. Be sure to like the video if you like it. Just saying. Thanks, guys.